Get out! I didn't invite you, snapped my daughter-in-law when I tried to sit at the table I myself had set since 5 a.m. for my son's birthday. But it was my house. I slowly stood up, walked to the door, and did something that left every guest speechless. I'd been up since before dawn, the way I always am for his birthday. Roast in the oven by 6, the good linen ironed by 7, place cards written in my own hand so nobody had to guess where they belonged, the way I've done it every year since he was small enough to need a booster seat at this same table. This house has been mine for 26 years. My husband built the dining table himself the first summer we owned the place. Oak he sanded by hand over 3 weekends while our son sat in a bouncer in the corner watching the sawdust catch the light. I can still smell the varnish sometimes if I run my palm across the wood at a certain hour when the sun comes low through the west window. It's not really the smell, it's memory pretending to be one. I let it happen anyway. He passed 4 years ago. Sudden, no warning worth mentioning. The house became a different kind of quiet after that. Not peaceful, just empty in a specific shape. I filled that shape as best I could. My daughter-in-law moved in with my son 2 years ago, right before the wedding, while they saved for a place of their own. I welcomed it, told myself a full house again would be good for all of us. For a while, it felt that way. She admired the table the first week, ran her hand along the grain the same way I used to, said you don't see craftsmanship like that anymore, and something in my chest loosened that I hadn't realized was tight. I want to be fair about the timeline because it matters later. I don't think she arrived with a plan. I think the plan assembled itself gradually, the way water finds every low place in a floor before you notice the floor wasn't level. It started small, the kind of small that's easy to wave off individually, and only adds up if you're keeping count. I wasn't keeping count yet. The spice cabinet went first, rearranged and alphabetized while I was at the pharmacy. More intentional, she said. I laughed about it at the time, told my neighbor over the fence I had a very organized new roommate. She gave me a look I didn't understand yet and said, let's see how that goes. I should have asked her what she meant. I didn't. The bath towels went next. 8 years of a soft, faded blue I'd never needed to be fashionable, replaced overnight with hotel white ones folded into thirds instead of half. These photographs so much better, she said, if I ever want to post the bathroom, as though that had quietly become a category of thing a bathroom needed to do. I didn't fight her on it. Fighting over towels felt petty. I didn't yet understand that every small thing I let go of was one she didn't have to ask about again. The recliner was the first one that actually hurt. It had been his, angled toward the window where the afternoon light hit it right for reading, the leather worn soft in the shape of his hands. I kept it after he died, not as a shrine, just because it still smelled faintly like him if I pressed my face into the headrest. I came home from book club to find the corner of the living room empty, only an indent left in the carpet. Oh, that old thing didn't fit the vibe anymore, she said, barely looking up from her phone. I donated it. There's a place that picks up furniture free. It was actually really convenient. She hadn't donated it. I found it 3 days later, shoved in the garage behind her unopened delivery boxes, already dusty. She'd lied to my face without any particular effort, which told me 2 things: that lying cost her nothing, and that some part of her had known outright removal might not survive contact with me. I dragged it back to its spot myself and said nothing about finding it. I told myself I was choosing my battles. I understand now I was simply losing them one at a time, quietly, in a way that didn't feel like losing because nothing was ever taken all at once. My son noticed none of it, or noticed it the way you notice weather changing and decide noticing isn't the same as needing to act. He worked long hours at a job he didn't love, came home tired, and let the house arrange itself around him. I don't think he was choosing her over me. I think he'd simply stopped being the one making decisions in his own home, and hadn't noticed that either. By spring, she was calling it our place in front of her friends, easily. The way you say a thing you've said enough times, it stops feeling like a claim. I never corrected her. Every week that went uncorrected got a little truer by repetition. My hairdresser mentioned something that stuck with me longer than it should have. My daughter-in-law had come in for a color appointment and talked at some length about helping me modernize before I couldn't keep up with the place myself. I laughed it off in the chair, and for longer than I probably should have anywhere else, until I finally sat with what that sentence actually implied. I was 61. I walked 3 miles most mornings, balanced my own checkbook, drove myself everywhere. The sentence wasn't about my capability. It was about a future she'd already started narrating to other people, in which the house's ownership had a natural, gentle drift toward her. Around this same time, my son's job cut his hours. Not laid off, but overtime gone. Paycheck smaller by a margin that mattered. He mentioned it once, quick and a little ashamed, the way he'd mentioned money trouble his whole life. I told him not to worry. I didn't yet know his reduced hours were about to become, quietly, my problem. I found out about the property taxes by accident, pulling an old folder from what used to be my husband's filing cabinet, and noticing the county bill sitting unopened in a drawer that wasn't usually mine to check. 2 months past due, addressed to me. The deed had only ever had my name on it, but somehow never reaching me at all. My son had offered to handle the house bills months back as a way of contributing, and she'd taken over that folder specifically. He hadn't checked it since. It was not being handled. I paid the tax bill myself, plus the penalty, without saying anything. I started quietly checking that drawer every week. What I found over the following month: the insurance renewal, also late, also now paid by me. 2 utility bills gone to a second notice before I caught them. A monthly charge on the account she and my son shared for a linen service delivering fresh towels and bedding on rotation, at a cost very close to the amount his hours had been cut. I bought a plain manila folder and started putting copies of everything inside. I told no one. I wasn't consciously building a case yet. I was just a person putting papers in a folder, telling myself if it was prudent rather than admitting it was the beginning of something. You know this isn't going to stop on its own, my neighbor said, the first time I told her all of it on our morning walk. I told her I knew. I don't think I fully did. Some part of me was still hoping one honest conversation with my son would fix things. I tried it the following Saturday, when she was out at a spin class. Coffee, kitchen table, the way we used to talk before any of this started. I laid out the tax bill, the insurance. I held back the linen service, some instinct telling me to see what he volunteered first. I didn't know about the taxes, he said, turning his cup without drinking. I thought that was handled. I believed him about the taxes specifically. I think my son isn't dishonest so much as he'd arranged his life so certain categories of responsibility belonged to someone else by default, and never checked whether the arrangement was actually working. I'll talk to her, he said. This won't happen again. It happened again within the month. A new utility bill, then a subscription I didn't recognize, then 6 new dining chairs arriving on a Tuesday while I was at the pharmacy. I came home to find our old chairs. His chairs, chosen with him, sat in for thousands of meals across a marriage, stacked at the curb with a handwritten free sign, already gone. I didn't cry, though I stood in the driveway a long moment feeling something close to it, a grief that had nothing to do with the chairs themselves and everything to do with how completely, without a single conversation, a decision about my own home had already been made and executed before I knew it was on the table. That evening, I told my son, gently, this isn't stopping. He looked genuinely uncertain for the first time, like a man realizing the ground under a decision he'd made without thinking had shifted while he wasn't watching. I'll talk to her again, he said, and I could hear that even he no longer entirely believed it would be enough. I made the appointment the following week, telling almost no one. Small office above a bakery downtown. A woman recommended by someone at my church who'd gone through something similar with a stepson years back. She doesn't waste your time, the recommendation went, and doesn't let anyone waste hers either. I laid out everything. The spice cabinet, the towels, the recliner in the garage, the tax bill, the linen service, the chairs at the curb. She listened without interrupting, then set her pen down and asked the question that mattered more than any other in this whole story. Is the deed solely in your name? Yes. My husband and I had bought the house together, but somewhere in years of paperwork, my name had ended up the only one on the current deed. We'd never added our son. No reason to. Not with him a child. Not with no urgency to think about estate matters. It had simply never come up. That, she said, is the only fact that matters right now. Everything else, the towels, the way she talks about the house to your hairdresser, none of it has legal weight on its own. But you own this property outright. Whatever the emotional complexity, you retain the legal right to decide who lives in it. She explained the mechanics plainly. As sole owner, I could, if it came to that, formally request any non-owner occupant vacate following the proper legal notice period, and the fact that it was my son's wife rather than a stranger changed nothing about the legal mechanics involved, however much it complicated everything else. I'm not saying you need to do that today, she added, watching my face do something complicated. I'm saying you should understand the option exists clearly, separate from whether you use it. A lot of people in your position spend months feeling powerless in their own home because nobody's told them plainly they're not. She told me to keep documenting. Everything dated, copied, kept somewhere she couldn't access or alter. Every dollar I spent covering costs that weren't originally mine, because a clear record of who'd actually been maintaining the property would matter more than any argument about towels ever could. And if she does something that crosses a real line, she said, as I gathered my coat, something public, something that actually damages you in front of other people, don't react in the moment. Document it and come back to me. The version of this where you win cleanly is the version where you're calm and she isn't. I walked back to my car with my folder under my arm and something steadier in my chest than it had held in months. I wasn't powerless. I had simply forgotten for a while that I wasn't. The chandelier arrived 3 weeks later. I came home from the pharmacy to find a delivery van idling in the driveway. 2 installers already mounting something enormous and crystal above my husband's table. Early birthday surprise, she said, wiping dust from her hands, already deciding any objection would be unreasonable. Doesn't it look incredible? I asked how much it cost and how the installers had gotten in without me being asked for a key. Don't worry about the cost. Your son put it on his card. I still have the spare key from when I locked myself out, remember? Made more sense than making you drive home early. I checked the account that evening, just under $3,000. His card, the same one carrying the linen service and the chairs, was already close to its limit. Months of spending compressed into charges he'd never once discussed as household decisions so much as had explained to him afterward, the same way most of it had been explained to me. I added the receipt to the folder and said nothing. I'd learned by then that saying something in the moment accomplished nothing except warning her which threads I was pulling. I'd rather she keep operating visibly, carelessly, on the record, than start being careful because she suspected I was paying closer attention than I let on. That was the month I stopped thinking of the folder as merely keeping records and started thinking of it, quietly, as building something. The week before the party, I came home from my walk to find a man in a polo shirt in my backyard with a clipboard and a tape measure, photographing the house from several angles while she stood beside him, gesturing at the yard the way people gesture at things they're selling. Oh, you must be his mother, right? He said, recovering from the startle of being caught. Tom, with Meridian Realty, just doing preliminary photos, getting a sense of the property for a potential listing. A listing, I said. Who authorized a listing on my property? We talked about this, she said, stepping forward, expression arranging itself into something reasonable. This house is too much for one person. You'd be so much more comfortable somewhere smaller, and the equity could set all of us up so much better. I asked him directly whether he'd seen any documentation, a listing agreement, anything with an owner's signature. He admitted uncomfortably that he had not. He'd been told by phone the owner was aware and supportive. I told him calmly that I was the sole owner. No such conversation had taken place, and I'd appreciate him deleting whatever photos he'd already taken. He apologized and did exactly that, packing up and leaving faster than he'd arrived. You invited someone to sell my house without asking me, I said, once we were alone. We were trying to help you, she said, though something in her voice had shifted, gone slightly less certain. This place is too big. You're going to be more comfortable somewhere smaller. And honestly, so are we. I am comfortable exactly where I am, I said. This house is not for sale. It was never for sale. Going forward, I'd like to be informed before strangers with clipboards are given access to my property. She turned and went inside without answering, the screen door banging behind her in a way that felt less like anger and more like retreat, the sound of someone recalculating. I called the attorney that afternoon. Good, she said when I finished. Now you have something concrete on the record, with a witness who isn't family. Keep documenting. I think it's time we drafted some actual paperwork, not just a folder, just in case. And the paperwork the attorney meant wasn't the notice to vacate. Not yet. It was simpler and more diagnostic. A short list of household rules, drafted over an hour in her office, worded so no one could later claim confusion. Watch how each of them responds to a boundary that has nothing behind it yet except your signature, she said, typing. Whatever they do next, you'll know exactly what you're dealing with. Any changes to the house required my written approval beforehand. No gatherings without the homeowner present and informed in advance. The house was not for sale, lease, or transfer without my explicit written consent. Full stop. I printed one copy and taped it to the refrigerator that evening in plain sight. She found it first. I heard her heels on the tile, then the particular silence of someone reading something twice. What is this? She said, holding a corner of the paper like it might be contagious. House rules, just so everyone's clear. She laughed, a short sound with very little humor in it. This is a little intense, don't you think? We're family. You don't need to legislate us. Family generally doesn't need written rules, I said, because family generally respects boundaries without being told twice. I've told you several times now. Here we are. My son came in a few minutes later, tired, scanning the paper like a man walking into a conversation that had been going on without him. Is this really necessary, Mom? After the realtor in the backyard? Yes. Overdue, actually. She crossed her arms, and I watched the practiced warmth of 2 years fall away just slightly, something more calculating underneath. If this house makes you so unhappy having us in it, she said, maybe we should just buy it from you. It's old anyway. You could use the money for something smaller. I looked at her a long moment, long enough that it seemed to unsettle her more than any immediate answer would have. This house isn't for sale, I said. Not to you, not to anyone. Not now, and not ever. Regardless of what arguments get made about its size or my age, I've earned the right to decide that, and I intend to keep deciding it. You're being unreasonable. Maybe, but it's my unreasonable to have in my own house. She walked out without another word. I heard the bedroom door close upstairs with more force than necessary. My son lingered, looking at the paper, then at me. I don't think she meant the buying it out thing seriously, he said. I think you should ask her whether she meant it, I said, because I believed every word. I sat in the recliner a long time after the house went quiet, turning the evening over, the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath it. Something had shifted. Taping that paper to the refrigerator had done something the folder alone never had, made the boundary visible, real in the way something only becomes real once it's stated out loud and displayed where no one can later claim they hadn't seen it. I thought about what the attorney had said, about watching how people respond to a boundary with nothing behind it yet except a signature. My son's response had been discomfort, a man realizing a line existed without deciding which side he wanted to stand on. Hers had been something else, not discomfort, but recalculation. The offer to buy the house had arrived too readily, as though it had been sitting prepared behind her teeth for weeks, waiting for the right provocation. That worried me more than anything else so far. A person caught off guard scrambles. A person with an answer ready before the question is fully asked has usually been planning for it. The days that followed were calmer than they'd been in months. No new furniture, no strangers with clipboards. I let myself believe cautiously that the rules had drawn a line clear enough even she understood crossing it again would cost her something. I should have known better. People who are recalculating don't usually announce that they've stopped. You know, my neighbor said on our Tuesday walk when I told her about the buying out offer, the slammed door. People like that don't back down when you draw a line. They just get quieter about how they cross it. I told her I hoped she was wrong. Some part of me already suspected she wasn't. It was the following Thursday, I remember the day specifically, hands full of folding chairs at the community center, when my phone buzzed with her name on the screen. 3 short buzzes in quick succession instead of the usual one, and something in that urgency told me before I answered that whatever calm the past week had offered was about to end. There's a car in your driveway I don't recognize, my neighbor said, skipping any greeting, voice low. Silver SUV. A man's walking around your front yard with a sign in his hands. A for sale sign. I don't remember the drive so much as I remember suddenly being in the car, keys already turned, the folding chairs abandoned mid-stack for someone else to finish. 15 minutes later, I turned onto my street to find exactly what she'd described. The SUV at an angle in my driveway. A man in a blazer driving a metal stake into my front lawn with a placard already half-mounted, the agency's logo bright against the green. She stood on the porch directing him toward optimal street visibility. What? I said, getting out before I fully parked, is happening on my lawn. He startled. She didn't. If anything, her expression settled into something satisfied. A woman who'd been waiting for an audience before delivering a line already rehearsed. first. We're listing the house, she said. Since you won't discuss selling like reasonable adults, I found an agent willing to move forward on the assumption this gets resolved. He needs a signed agreement by end of week, but we could get the sign up now to start generating interest. There is no listing agreement, I said, because I am the only person with legal authority to sign one, and I have signed nothing. Your son signed on your behalf, she said, with an easy confidence that made the ground feel briefly unsteady in a way nothing this year had managed. As next of kin, given your age, given the pattern of decision-making we've all been a little concerned about lately, I asked the man directly whether he'd seen a deed, a title, anything establishing ownership. He hesitated. I was given a document I understood to be a power of attorney. I haven't independently verified. There is no power of attorney, I said. There has never been one. I am 61 years old, in full possession of every legal faculty I've ever had, and I did not authorize my son or anyone else to sign anything on my behalf regarding this property. Ever. He lowered the mallet, the placard still only half-driven, listing to one side. I need to make a call to my office, he said, stepping away toward his vehicle. In the silence that followed, she and I stood facing each other in a way that felt, for the first time, less like an argument and more like an actual reckoning finally arriving on schedule. You had someone forge a power of attorney, I said. Nobody forged anything, she said, though her voice had thinned at the edges. It's more of a formality. Everyone assumed you'd be fine with it once you saw the number the agent quoted. $600,000. Do you understand what that could do for all of us? For your grandchildren someday? I understand, I said, that you had a document produced claiming legal authority that does not exist, and presented it to a stranger to sell my home out from under me without my knowledge. The realtor returned a few minutes later, phone still in hand, expression considerably more careful. I've spoken with my broker. We're pulling the listing, effective immediately. I was given assurances that turned out not to be accurate. He glanced at her, wary now. I'll need that sign back. I'd strongly recommend an attorney of your own before this goes further, ma'am, on either side of it. He pulled the stake, loaded the sign, and left considerably faster than he'd arrived. I called my own attorney from the driveway, hands still shaking slightly. I think it's time, I told her. The attorney's office felt different that visit, less like a consultation and more like a war room, though neither of us used that word out loud. A forged power of attorney presented to a licensed real estate agent, she said, reading back the notes I'd given her over the phone the night before, is not a family disagreement anymore. That's the kind of thing that, if you wanted, could involve the district attorney's office. I'm not saying you have to go that route. I'm saying you have real leverage now, not just a folder of receipts. I told her I wasn't interested in criminal charges. I wanted the house back, quietly, cleanly, in a way that let my son find his own way through whatever came next, without his mother having sent his wife to jail as part of it. She nodded like she'd expected that answer and respected it. Then here's what I'd suggest, she said. We draft the formal 30-day notice now, today, ready to file the moment you decide to use it. Not served yet, just ready. In the meantime, you keep documenting. And if she gives you one more clean, undeniable moment, something with witnesses, something she can't later claim was a misunderstanding, that's when we file. And that's when it becomes real for everyone at once, in front of people who'll remember exactly how it happened. I asked her what she meant by a clean moment. She looked at me for a second before answering, like she already suspected I knew. You're hosting a birthday party in a few weeks, aren't you? I hadn't told her that. I'd mentioned it in passing weeks earlier, one detail among many, and she filed it away the way she seemed to file away every detail I gave her, waiting to see which ones would matter. I am, I said. Then I'd start there, she said. Not because I want you to stage anything. Please don't stage anything. That only weakens things later. I mean, go about your business exactly as you normally would. Set your table the way you always do. And if something happens in front of 12 witnesses that gives you the moment you need, you'll already have the notice sitting in a folder in your car, ready to be more than words. She printed the document there in the office and handed it to me across the desk. A single page, formal, my name, and the property address at the top. A 30-day window spelled out in language too plain to argue with. I folded it once and put it in my purse, where it sat for the next 2 weeks like something both heavier and lighter than paper has any right to be. I didn't know, walking out of that office, that I'd end up using it on the exact day I'd expected to, for the exact reason I hadn't expected at all. Not the forged document, not the realtor, not any of the things I'd been carefully building a case around for months, but something much simpler, said out loud in front of everyone, at a table I'd set myself since 5 that morning. The 2 weeks between the attorney's office and the party passed with a strange, brittle calm, the kind that settles over a house after a storm everyone knows is only gathering strength somewhere just out of sight. She was polite to me in that stretch, almost aggressively so, complimenting a casserole I made, asking after my walk with the neighbor, the way you're polite to someone you've decided privately doesn't need to be dealt with directly anymore because a different plan is already underway. I didn't know exactly what that plan was. I only knew, the way you know weather is changing before the sky actually does anything about it, that something in her had settled into a different gear. My son mentioned a few days before the party that she'd invited a lot of her college friends this year, more than usual, which struck me as an odd detail to volunteer until I understood, later, exactly why it mattered. A fuller room meant a fuller audience, and audiences, I would come to learn, mattered enormously to her, in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until I watched her use one. The morning of the party, I did exactly what the attorney had told me to do, which was nothing different at all. I was up before the sun again, the same roast in the oven by the same hour, the good linen ironed and laid flat by 7, place cards in my own hand, written the way I've written them every year, my son's name where it always went, at the head, said, near the window where his father used to sit. She came down around 9, already dressed for the party, took one look at the place cards, and rearranged 3 of them without a word to me, moving her own friends closer to the head of the table, moving my sister-in-law, an elderly woman with a hearing aid who needs to sit where she can actually follow conversation, down toward the far end instead. I said something small, that I'd already arranged the seating with everyone's needs in mind. She said the seating needed a refresh like everything else around here, and didn't put the cards back. By 4, the house was full, her friends laughing in the living room, my son's co-workers by the drink table, my sister-in-law settled, eventually, back in the seat I'd originally given her after I quietly moved the card back while my daughter-in-law was occupied elsewhere. The roast rested on the counter exactly the way my husband used to like it. For a little while, moving through the noise and the smell of the kitchen, I let myself believe the day might simply pass the way ordinary birthdays used to. Before any of this started, I was carrying the last dish to the table, both hands full, easing past the head chair toward my own seat, the one beside where my husband used to sit, when she turned toward me with a wine glass already half raised, her voice pitched exactly loud enough to carry to every corner of the room. "Get out. I didn't invite you." She said it the way you'd say something you'd rehearsed enough times that it no longer felt like a risk, a small laugh riding underneath it like she expected the room to laugh along, the way you laugh at a joke that isn't really a joke at all. Nobody laughed. My son went pale at the head of the table, the one nearest the window, the one that used to belong to his father. His co-worker beside him stopped mid-sentence, fork halfway to his mouth. My sister-in-law, half a beat behind because of the hearing aid, saw the room go quiet before she fully caught the words, and looked around with the particular confusion of someone who knows something has happened, but not yet what. I stood very still, both hands full with the serving dish, the weight of it suddenly enormous, the ceramic warm through the oven mitts. "This is my house," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which surprised me almost as much as the words themselves had a moment before. "It's my husband's house too," she said, her voice dropping the performed brightness now, something harder underneath it, something that had clearly been waiting behind her teeth for exactly this moment, or one very much like it. "And frankly, I think it's about time we all started acting like adults live here instead of like we're asking your permission for every single thing." I looked at the table, his table, built with his own hands the summer our son was a baby, the linen I'd ironed at 5 that morning, the roast I'd basted every half hour since dawn, and I set the serving dish down very carefully so it wouldn't shake, so nothing would spill, and give her the satisfaction of watching my hands fail in front of everyone. Then I said, "I'll be right back." I don't think anyone in that room understood what I meant by it. I'm not entirely sure I did either, not consciously, not in the moment. Some part of me was simply moving on instinct built over months, the way you move through a fire drill you never expected to actually need. I walked past my husband's photograph on the wall, past the coats piled on the bench by the door, out to my car in the driveway, where a single folded page had been sitting in the glove compartment for 2 weeks, exactly the way the attorney had suggested, ready to be more than words the moment the right room, with the right witnesses, finally handed me the moment I needed. I opened the glove compartment. I took out the page. I stood in my own driveway for one long breath, the party noise faint behind me through the closed front door, and then I walked back inside. The room hadn't moved much in the time I'd been gone, though it had the particular stillness of a room that's been talking about you the second you left it and stopped the instant the door opened again. She'd recovered some of her composure, I noticed, standing near the head of the table with her wine glass refilled, already halfway through rebuilding the moment into something smaller than it had been. A joke that landed wrong, a misunderstanding, nothing worth this much silence. "Sorry, everyone," I heard her say as I came back through the front hall. "Family stuff, you know how it is," with a small practiced laugh meant to invite the room back into normal conversation. A few people did try. Someone picked their fork back up. Someone else said something about the roast smelling wonderful, a little too brightly, the way people talk when they're trying to paper over a silence rather than actually fill it. I walked to the table, the folded page still in my hand, and I didn't sit down. "Before everyone gets back to dinner," I said, and something in my voice must have carried more weight than her rebuilding effort had, because the room went quiet again almost instantly, fork stopping midair, my son's coworker setting his glass down without drinking from it. "I want to finish what my daughter-in-law started a minute ago. She's right that there's something worth saying to this whole table." My son looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him since he was a teenager, caught somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. Not quite panic, but close to it. A boy realizing an adult conversation was about to happen in a room he didn't feel ready for. She laughed again, thinner this time, glancing around the table as if checking whether anyone else found this as unnecessary as she was trying to project that she did. "Okay, this is a little much for a birthday dinner, don't you think?" "I think," I said, "a birthday dinner is exactly the setting you chose for this, so I don't see why I should choose a different one for my answer." I set the folded page down on the table, beside her wine glass, in the exact spot where a place card with my own name had sat that morning before she'd moved it. I didn't open it yet. I let it sit there a moment, letting everyone, look at it. A single, unremarkable piece of paper that hadn't yet announced what it was. "I want to be fair," I said, "and give you the chance to say whatever it is you meant to say a minute ago, in front of everyone, since you clearly meant for everyone to hear it the first time." She didn't say anything. For the first time since I'd known her, I watched her genuinely struggle to find a next line. I picked the page back up. "This," I said, unfolding the page, "is a 30-day notice to vacate. It's already been drawn up by my attorney, dated, and ready to be filed with the county the moment I decide it needs to be. It's addressed to both of you." The room had gone completely, absolutely silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against your ears. I own this house, I said, turning slightly so I could speak to the whole table, not just to her, solely. The deed has only ever had my name on it, which I understand some of you have been told is negotiable or uncertain, or something a document with the wrong signature on it could quietly change. It isn't, and it can't. My son's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Mom, I'm not finished, I said gently, but firmly enough that he stopped. I have spent the past several months watching this house be redecorated, mortgaged out from under me in conversation, if not yet in fact, and finally offered up for sale to a stranger with a forged power of attorney, all while I quietly kept paying the property taxes and the insurance that had gone unpaid because somebody needed to, and it clearly wasn't going to be anyone else in this house. I looked directly at her now. She hadn't moved, her wine glass still raised at the same angle it had been when she'd said get out, as though some part of her hadn't caught up yet to how badly the last 30 seconds had gone. You told a real estate agent I'd signed a document I never saw, authorizing a sale I never agreed to, I said. You told my son's co-workers, my own sister-in-law, everyone in this room that I wasn't invited to a table I set myself since 5 o'clock this morning in a house that has never once, for a single day of its 26 years, belonged to anyone but me and my late husband. Someone at the far end of the table made a small, involuntary sound, quickly stifled. My sister-in-law, catching up now through the hearing aid, had both hands pressed to her mouth. So, I said, I'm not asking you to leave my table tonight. I'm telling you that you have 30 days, starting from the date on this notice, to find somewhere else to live, because as of this moment, that's no longer a request. It's already filed. I hadn't filed it. Not yet. The attorney had made clear that filing itself would happen the moment I gave the word. A single call, a single signature witnessed and dated. And I understood, holding the page in a room gone entirely silent around me, that the sentence I'd just said out loud was no longer entirely true in the present tense, so much as it was a promise I fully intended to keep true within the hour. You can't do this, she said, finally, her voice in now, stripped of everything performed. This is insane. It's his birthday. It is his birthday, I said, which is exactly why I let you say what you said before I said anything back. I wanted every person in this room to hear it from you first, so nobody could later wonder whose idea it actually was to turn tonight into this. Nobody at that table said anything for a long moment. My sister-in-law had tears in her eyes, whether from shock or something closer to relief I couldn't tell. My son's coworker was staring very hard at his plate, the particular focus of a man trying to become furniture. My son finally spoke, his voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. Mom, is any of it true? The power of attorney? All of it? Every word, I said. I have the folder in my car if you'd like to see it tonight. I'd rather you saw it from me than found it some other way. He looked at his wife then, really looked at her, in a way I hadn't seen him do in months, maybe longer. Not with anger yet, more like a man doing arithmetic he should have done a long time ago and hadn't. She set her wine glass down at last, hand not quite steady, and didn't answer either of us. Something in her face had gone still in a way I hadn't seen from her before, like someone who understood exactly how much smaller a room could get in 30 seconds. I'd like everyone to stay and eat, I said, to the table at large, my voice gentler now because none of this was theirs to carry. The roast is getting cold, and none of you did anything except come to a birthday dinner. Please, sit. A few people did, slowly, uncertainly, the particular careful movement of guests trying to decide whether normalcy is allowed again. Someone finally picked up the serving spoon. My sister-in-law reached over and squeezed my hand once, hard, without a word, and I squeezed back. She didn't sit back down. She stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out through the front door without another word to anyone, her heels loud on the hardwood in a way that felt, this time, unmistakably like retreat rather than performance. My son didn't follow her right away. He sat there a long moment looking at his own plate, then finally looked up at me. Mom, I didn't know about any of it. I know, I said. That's why the notice has your name on it too, not just hers. 30 days to figure out, together or apart, where you both land. Either way, this table's mine. So is the house it sits in. He nodded slowly and reached for his fork like a man having dinner in his mother's home again, for the first time in longer than either of us had noticed.